It's my very great pleasure to introduce our final panel in collaboration with Mishcon Durea. Mishcon is a law firm in London, and they have generously sponsored this series of events. And our final one tonight is the power of young people. Generation change. I believe that I've got four of the most important voices in the youth climate movement with me today. I'm incredibly excited. My name is Hannah. I'm the co-founder of Shadow. Shadow is a multimedia platform that uses lived experience to drive change at the intersection of arts, activism, and academia. And I will leave my wonderful panel to introduce themselves because I don't think I'll be able to do it justice. And so I will start with Nikki.
Hi everyone, I'm Nikki. I'm 20 years old, climate justice activist from Argentina. I have been a climate activist since I was 18 years old when I found Jóvenes por el Clima, the Argentinian Friday for Future chapter. And since then, I have been a coordinator and international spokesperson for the movement. And I also very active at the international level in Friday for Future.
Thank you. And let's go on to Mitzi next.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Mitzi. I am a climate justice activist from the Philippines. I became an activist in 2017 when I was able to talk to an indigenous leader of our land. And in 2019, I co-founded Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, the Fridays for Future of the Philippines. And like Nikki, I do a lot of things in Fridays for Future International and also an international spokesperson. I actually work a lot with Nikki, so I'm so happy to have her with me here today.
And yeah, Neil, you go for it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Neil. I am a writer, conservationist, and activist from the Bahamas. And I got my start in this work in 2017, just after undergrad, where I studied biology with a minor in chemistry. And I got my start in conservation through doing initiatives such as mangrove plantings and beach cleanups. In terms of activism, I got my real start, I think last year, which was with the initiative Sail for Climate Action, which was dedicated to amplifying the voices of youth from Latin America and the Caribbean. And before the conferences were canceled, we were supposed to sail all the way from Cartagena, Colombia to attend the conferences in Bonn. Since then, I've worked with Building Bridges for Climate Action, which was an extension of the prior program, but just in a virtual format. Currently, I work with Bad Activist Collective, and we are a collective of artists, change makers, justice seekers, activists, and we are dedicated to dismantling systems of perfectionism and oppression. Additionally, I have worked with Pastor My Climate and Black Girl Environmentalists, most recently with Wawa, for the Reclaiming Our Time initiative. So I'm very excited to see her here as well, and excited to see where this conversation takes us.
Great, thank you so much. And last but not least, Wawa.
Neil, it's so great to see you. It's so great to see everyone here. I'm sorry I'm like a minute late. I was running from class. My name is Wajiko. Friends call me Wawa. I'm a Kenyan American. I am usually based in the UK for the past year, but I'm currently back in Hartford, Connecticut. I think I'd say I got my start in this work from more of an academic lens. I took an environmental science class in high school, which served as my big aha moment of realizing that people of color, and particularly Black people, must have a role in environmental issues as I began to get a language of what environmental justice was, though my life experiences had already kind of shown me the dynamics of environmental racism in my life or that of folks that are close to me. And from there, I went to the University of Connecticut, and a lot of my leadership and activism started there with student government and helping that university become the first in the US to implement an environmental literacy general education requirement, to working at the state level. I did a lot of work on food insecurity, and we launched the first assessment of food insecurity at a public institution in the state. And that study was actually used to inform the creation of state law and actually was introduced as a federal law by one of our US senators. And since then, I've been environmental justice advocate, speaking across the country on issues of environmental justice, and really ensuring that Black voices are at the forefront of climate conversations. And currently, I'm a graduate student at the University of Oxford, where I study at the intersections of environment, policy, and race. And my research really looks at the way, or specifically understudied barriers that exist for youth of color to participate in environmental education, barriers like colorism, as well as other barriers that literature just simply doesn't exist. And at the moment, I'm the founder of Black Girl Environmentalists, which is a really amazing collective, an intergenerational collective of Black girls, Black women, and Black non-binary environmentalists from around the world. And essentially, we're here to take up space and make sure that our voices are heard and really facilitate resources and content that centers our lived experiences rather than sidelines them.
Thank you so much. And it's so exciting to see that a lot of our panel already know each other and are working together, which is all the more incredible because we're all coming from different points around the world today. I might start with Mitzi, considering you are in the Philippines and it is very early or very late, depending on how you look at it, where you are at the moment. And it would be great to hear what climate challenges you're currently facing where you are.
The Philippines is the fourth most vulnerable country in the world to the climate crisis, according to like the latest global climate risk index. But I know that doesn't mean much to a lot of people. So I guess to ground it a bit more, last year, in the span of 1 month, we had 3 typhoons. One of them was the strongest typhoon on the planet that year. And then a week after, a typhoon that had poured over a month's worth of rain in under 24 hours. And I grew up just fearing that I would one day drown in my bedroom. It was a reality to me that at any moment, our house could be consumed by the floods. And in the typhoons last year, people's houses were consumed 40 feet or 12 meters high up to 2nd or 3rd floor buildings. And this is why we fight back, because we see how real the climate crisis is today, not just in the future, not something that's going to happen 10 or 20 or 30 years from now, but it's already happening today. That's why we need to talk about it. We need to act urgently because this is something already happening. We need to talk about adaptation and mitigation at the same time.
Absolutely. And could I go to Nikki next? Yeah, what are the climate challenges that are facing Argentina specifically?
Yeah, well, in Argentina, no one seriously discussed the climate crisis until 2019, when we found Jóvenes por el Clima Argentina, Youth for Climate Argentina, and we organized marches with more than 45,000 people in attendance. But before the marches, no one in the media, nowhere at school, nor anywhere else seemed to be talking about it. And there are many people who still don't understand how it affects them on a daily basis because they think it's far removed from the everyday problems. So I think that the biggest challenge we are facing is to change the first picture associated with the climate crisis, that is still a polar bear. Because yes, it's true, the polar bear are in their general extinction, but right now millions of people are already suffering the consequences. And we need people to understand that there is no social justice without climate justice. And in Argentina, more than 1 million hectares of forest and land were burned in 2020 because of the climate crisis. Glaciers are melting faster and faster, and we have one of the highest rates of deforestation in the world. And today, like really today, we went on a strike because one governor of the province of Chubut, who campaigned against the mega mining, now want to approve a mega mining project, and this project is an environmental and social disaster. And he campaigned like 2 years ago saying no to the mega mining, and now he's the biggest promoter, like he betrayed his people. So today there were massive strikes in the country, so we will see what happened with the mega mining here. That is also like a big issue.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nikki. And Neil, can I go to you from the Bahamas?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the Bahamas, we are in a very precarious position because we are at the intersection of biodiversity loss, but also we are at risk for mega corporations coming in to expand projects such as oil drilling. So I'll start with the oil drilling first. Back in November, I was a part of a campaign to protest the oil drilling, and that was led by Only One, as well as Sea Legacy and Christina Mittermeier. And what we did was arrange a campaign that centered the voices of young Bahamian activists, conservationists, and environmental defenders. And we spoke out against the proposed oil drilling. To our great disdain, the oil drilling commenced. However, in recent time, the oil drilling has been ceased due to the fact that they were unsuccessful in obtaining large commercial quantities of the oil. That sounds like a minor success for the moment. However, they still have the contract to pursue further drilling at other sites. So that's one of the fights that's ongoing for us here. Additionally, we are facing huge, huge threats in terms of biodiversity loss, especially in the marine context. And what that looks like for us is coral bleaching events. That looks like populations being in drastic decline, such as the populations of the queen conch. And it also looks like threats such as the warming of the seas and sea level rising as well. It's predicted that the Bahamas will be one of 2 countries that will be completely underwater by the year 2100, given the projected turnaround of events. And so that's something that concerns me greatly. And when you combine that with elements such as hurricanes and superstorms, like Mitzi will have mentioned, as a low-lying state, it's a huge, huge risk for so much that we depend upon. And most recently, Hurricane Dorian can be used as a great testament to that. And I feel as though it's our place as activists and change makers to continue these campaigns and not only promote them while we're in the face of disaster, but as we try to normalize these campaigns and make them a part of our daily collective thinking. So biodiversity loss and of course industrialization are 2 of the hugest threats to activism in the Bahamas.
Thanks, Neil. And then finally, I'll go to Wawa. And I think that people will wrongly assume that the US isn't currently in the eye of the storm of the climate crisis. And I know a lot of the work that you do is looking at the barriers to kind of environmental work and specific barriers faced by people of colour. And so I'd love to hear a bit more about that in the context of the US, where you are at the moment, but then obviously you're in the UK when you study. And it's not COVID.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think there's this misconceived notion that even exists in the US that climate change is this futuristic issue that won't impact us now. And when we talk about the US geographically, it's already all encompassing, right? We have rising sea level in our coastal communities. We have erratic weather and droughts in the heartland of our country, the Midwest, which produces most of our food. And we've seen drastic intensification of drought in the past 5 years, which is more than we've seen in recorded history. We have more intense heat waves during the summer, which obviously impacts houseless folks, especially our elderly. We've seen more wildfires in the Pacific Northwest in ways that we literally have never seen before. And all of this without the infrastructure to deal with these issues adequately. We just saw a huge winter snowstorm that took the south corner of the United States by storm, and you still have Jackson, Mississippi that isn't having access to clean water because of this. You saw folks in Texas that were having their pipes burst, folks that were actually freezing to death. I believe there are multiple children that froze to death because Texas simply does not have the infrastructure to deal with a snowstorm, because we simply have never seen that before. And then that's on an all-encompassing level. But when we think about the folks that are at the forefront of the climate crisis and environmental degradation in all corners of the country, outside of erratic weather changes, we see that people of color and particularly low-income communities of color are already experiencing environmental degradation and climate change first and worse. I'll situate it within Connecticut. So in Connecticut, we have over 600 pollution sources in 5 of our major cities: Hartford, Bridgeport, Stamford, Waterbury, and New Haven. And with those 5 towns, that's 71% of our state's people of color, and 51% of our state's people that are in poverty, and that's over 600 pollution sources that are situated within those towns that already have folks of low income status, folks that are of color, folks that don't have political clout to be able to push back against a lot of these corporate interests. On top of that, we have the fact that after Citizens United, after the Citizens United landmark decision by the Supreme Court, corporations are now able to freely influence politics with their big money and influence and actually fund politicians that are now being financed by fossil fuel interests. So that has absolutely had a huge, huge impact on the way that climate change action and policy has been stifled. And a lot of politicians that even previously were interested in being a part of climate change as a nonpartisan issue have now made it into a partisan issue. So there's a lot of corporate interests that are infiltrating our political systems. And what we need is people to have the power to be able to once again influence our politics, and also for people to really get the environmental sector to become more up to date with talking about the fact that there are already communities that are experiencing this worse and worse, and we must be integrated within the decision-making process. And right now there is a huge gap in who's represented in the environmental space in the US. US 36% people of color. We only reach a 16% green ceiling of representation in the green workforce from nonprofits to the private sector. So there's a huge, huge barrier and issue there. So there needs to be a lot better systems to get folks of color in decision-making tables to make solutions that actually impact our community and create a just climate future that involves us.
Absolutely, and I assume, is that one of the roles that your new platform that Neil has recently contributed to? Is that what you work to do? Like, what's the most recent project that Neil and you worked on?
Yeah, so it's called Reclaiming Our Time. Reclaiming Our Time is essentially a campaign that was started in Black History Month, February's Black History Month in the US. And we saw from many of our experiences, which actually led us to create Black Girl Environmentalists, there's a tendency of sidelining of Black voices, of only taking the time to listen to or cater to Black people when it's sexy to do so, like this summer when people started to want to talk about anti-Black racism, and when those interests aren't really benefiting non-Black people, our voices aren't really paid attention to. So we decided to make a community that was very, very intentional about centering our voices, and also a safe space for us to talk freely about our experiences in the environmental space, while also providing more opportunities for us to take space in the environmental space. So with Reclaiming Our Time, we're essentially doing that, reclaiming the time of Black organizers, Black activists from around the world, not only in the United States. And essentially we've been pairing up our Black climate organizers and activists with prominent platforms, from brands to nonprofits to influencers and celebrities, so that they have the opportunity to take over platforms for a day, take part in IG story takeovers, IG lives, and really just orient audiences about the fact that Black environmentalists exist, but also talk about the issues that we're working on the ground. I think oftentimes people are always the one asking, how do I tap into folks doing work on the ground in regards to environmental justice? And we wanted to make it easy for people, right? There's a whole lineup of incredible folks doing incredible work in their community. We made it really easy, as well as making it a compensated opportunity so that people's times are obviously being compensated. So that's what we're doing right now, and we have just extended it into March, and we're going to continue with that matching process and just getting more and more Black organizers and activists, giving them the time that they deserve.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And please do put your handle in this chat and we can share it with everybody who is on this call. Mitzi, I'd love to go to you again, talking specifically again about the youth climate movement and the kind of barriers that you face. I know you've talked before about the recent vilification and sexism towards young climate activists in the Philippines, and I wondered if you could expand a bit on that.
The thing that's happening in the Philippines is kind of not logical to me. So we are clearly in an environmental crisis. You can see how impacted we are by the climate crisis, how our forests are diminishing, how our oceans are getting more and more polluted. Yet, instead of taking care of our environmental defenders, the people who are protecting the environment, our government is instead calling us terrorists. The Philippines is the second most dangerous country in the world for environmental defenders, and we're always in the top 3 or top 5 in the past like 10 years. And that's the reality of being an activist in the Philippines and a lot of places in the global south, actually, or MAPA, as we like to say it, most affected peoples and areas. Activism is seen as terrorism, and recently we had a terror law or anti-terror law of 2020 that got passed, and in that law it made the definition of terrorism so vague that even calling system change is considered an act of terrorism. And with that law, it makes everything that they were already doing before legal. So arrests without warrants, surveillance for up to 90 days without you knowing, both online and in person. You could just disappear and you could just be killed. And it's happened already with our environmental defenders and activists. Just last year in 2020, we had some activists who were killed while they were preparing community kitchens for farmers that were impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. I have had my fair share of death threats and being called a terrorist on my social media in my messages. And recently, this terror tagging or red tagging is what we're called. We'd say it here in the Philippines because they associate any progressiveness with the Communist Party here. And so they will say that the Communist Party are terrorists. So that's why it's called red tagging. Recently, the Lieutenant General Army of the Philippines said on Manila Times that young women calling for the protection of the environment who wear short shorts are doing it to entice young men to join the rebel army. So like just the mental gymnastics that had to happen to go from young women, short shorts, environment, enticing young men, rebel army. It's like there's so many hoops that they had to jump through, and we actually had to assess that as a team because I am one of the young girls who call for the protection of the environment, who wears short shorts a lot. And the crazy thing is when we were having those typhoons that I was talking about earlier, when we were calling for accountability from our national government and demanding justice from the global north countries that was causing the climate crisis, a lot of the comments in social media said, you don't deserve to be helped with a typhoon because you're wearing short shorts. Like the things that our leaders are saying is seeping into what people are thinking. And that is what we're fighting against. And this is why it's not just one thing. It's not just the weather that we have to talk about. It's not just about the climate that we have to talk about, but also the systems of freedom and democracy and the misogynistic characteristics and backwards thinking that our leaders are perpetrating and encouraging in the Filipino people. And it's such a difficult task because it feels so impossible sometimes that you have to face all these death threats, all these sexism, everything at the same time, the climate crisis. But then you remember that you're not doing it alone. You're doing it with so many people in the Philippines. We are like the youth movement is only joining the struggle of environmental defenders who have done this for so long. And then you look even further and you see that we have a global movement really fighting for the same thing in every country. And that just inspires me so much.
Thanks so much, Mitzi. Yeah, I think there's a lot to do with avoiding accountability, and the lengths that people will go to, leaders will go to, is definitely terrifying. But you're right, there is a brilliant community of people from across all nations. And I really liked what you were saying kind of about a long history of climate protection. And Nikki, I wondered if you could come in on that in terms of, the context that you are working to kind of fight for Indigenous rights in Argentina and the problems that you face as a youth climate activist.
Yeah, well, Latin America and the Caribbean is the most dangerous region to be a climate activist or an environmental defender, which is why the Escazú Agreement is so important for us. The Escazú Agreement talk about defend our defenders, by the way. And that's why with young people from all over the region, we are working a lot to like get more ratification, but also the effective implementation of the agreement. And for me, 2020 was a challenge year because Youth for Climate Argentina was born in 2019, and in 2020 the pandemic appears, and our biggest tool was a strike. So we had to rethink everything. And personally, it was a year in which I learned a lot and meet a lot of people, especially at the international level. Like last year, we create MAPA, Most Affected People and Areas at Friday for Future, and it was an incredible learning experience. It was a year, but it was also a year that burned me out a lot because I was on Zoom all day, and because I didn't have time to meet my friends because I have to do quarantine, and I was working all day without thinking about anything else, like all the time about the climate crisis, and sometimes it's like very hard. But at the same times, I think we managed to grow up the movement even more, engaging more people through social networks, because maybe there are people who don't go to a strike, but maybe like they share things in social media. So I think we managed to do that at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to actually maybe go to Neil next with the next question, which is how COVID has affected your movements. Nikki, obviously you're talking about kind of strikes being a huge part of your activism, which obviously couldn't happen in the same way. And Neil, I wondered what you thought about that.
Absolutely. So the thing about the COVID situation and activism in the sense that I've experienced it, it's been kind of a double-edged sword in the sense that my activism was obviously impacted because we had to end the Sail for Climate Action journey prematurely. And that was devastating for everyone involved, just because we had our intent so strong and we had mobilized and we were doing capacity building activities and seminars and talks. And we were this huge intersectional group of individuals from diverse backgrounds representing the Caribbean, Latin America, indigenous communities, and some parts of Europe and the UK. So COVID was a huge wrench in the framework that was beginning to come together for us. However, it's also been a huge blessing to the work that we were able to do. Through us being disbanded by COVID, we were able to attract the attention of the German government, who was really instrumental in helping us to implement the Building Bridges for Climate Action program. And so that was facilitated through the Ministry of Environment in conjunction with the youth program, which is Klima Delegation. And that was a huge success in the fact that it was able to connect us further. We were able to add a few more youth voices to our collective. And after that point, we were able to have a few public events. And that was such an instrumental part of what we initially wanted to do. When we were going to the intersectionals, we were going there to speak, obviously. However, I think what COVID allowed was a greater audience in terms of being able to have people sit at home and be a part of events that they may not be necessarily able to attend in person, whether it be because of work capabilities, because of physical capabilities, or simply just because they are not safe to be out in the streets and raise their voices in the ways that we'd be privileged to do. And so for that reason, I think COVID has kind of had some benefit in the sense that so many movements have come up and have been extrapolated beyond their international capabilities if they were just to try to do it in their own backyards. But obviously, there's a time when you want to be in person, and things like in-person strikes and being able to attend town hall meetings and being able to kind of get that interpersonal connection formed, those are very important. So I think the way forward is to absolutely capitalize on the virtual success of platforms like these and kind of integrate that into the framework going forward, in a sense that if something like this were to come up again, we wouldn't be so jolted initially, but it would just be business as usual, I think.
Absolutely, and it's very hopeful to hear about kind of how COVID has, you've managed to kind of find a positive spin on the circumstance. We've recently had a brilliantly hopeful piece from Dominique Palmer, who is a UK youth climate activist, who says that COVID has almost provided a moment and reorganization within the ranks of the climate movement. So they're putting, allowing for more inclusivity and putting the right voices at the forefront. Wawa, I wonder is there any positives that have come out of COVID for you and your organizing, or negatives, or I'd love to hear.
I think Neil put it perfectly, honestly. It's been a lot of benefits. Obviously, the pandemic has come with a lot of hardships in an all-encompassing way. In regards to myself personally, I think I was kind of having an identity crisis already before the pandemic hit. As I said before, the majority of my activism and organizing had been situated within my university and within like a lot of the folks here in person, rallying, meeting with folks that have institutional influence and kind of working in that space. And I guess I'd grown comfortable in being a leader in those spaces. So when everything was shifted to virtual, that was already going to happen in regards to a shift because I was graduating. So I knew that I was going to be leaving the state that I had done most of my organizing and advocacy in, and I was trying to figure out how I could continue to tap into my community when I'm not geographically there. And that was something that I was really grappling with. And then the pandemic hit, and that distancing happened a lot faster than I expected. So I actually spent a couple of months a bit depressed. I was like, how do I continue to organize with people when we're all kind of destabilized in every single way, shape, or form? And it felt like a lot of radio silence where I was. And then we kind of all were just like, okay. I personally was like, okay, this is a time for me to have a restart. What are things that I was always wanting in the organizing spaces that I was in? I always felt that where I am in Connecticut and where I've done most of my work, there's a lot of issues in regards to the lack of centering of folks of color, Black people being sidelined in environmental conversations at the environmental decision-making table. I just before listed the fact that folks of color, particularly Black and Latinx folks in Connecticut, are experiencing the forefront of environmental degradation, yet we are not at all represented in the environmental advocacy space at all. So that really led me to reaching out on Instagram, asking. I made a call for Black Girl Environmentalists in July, and the response was very overwhelming. Like over 150 people signed this Google form that I just made in the middle of the night, and we just started having informal meetings where we're just talking about our experiences as environmentalists. And I think we were able to really create this community that I didn't expect could happen so quickly and so authentically virtually. But it also, I think, has been a really, really beautiful example of the ways that people are really seeking for community. They're seeking for people that they can grow with, seeking people that they can organize with, and seeking people that are aligned with them in their values, particularly in the climate space. And I think that has been a really eye-opening experience for me, of seeing what the climate organizing space can look like outside of the mainstream. And it's really promising. I'd say as well, it's kind of opened my eyes in a lot of regards to the continuous sidelining of folks of color in this movement. With Reclaiming Our Time, it's been such an incredible movement where we've gotten to meet and connect with so many amazing Black organizers and activists from all over the world. I mean, I connected with Neil through this campaign, and it's been really, really incredible. And we've had a lot of grassroots success. I mean, most of us didn't really have a lot of connections. We were sending hard Instagram, cold DMs on Twitter and Instagram, and just, hoping for the best. And we've ended up getting a lot of really cool collaborations, and a lot of people have been able to talk about their work. And with that, we were able to partner with some folks that they've done like press releases and, put those out to large publications and news organizations. And we have gotten zero press coverage. Not that that's important, but it just shows you that even when we're using the avenues that are used by white organizers and activists within the climate space, and talking about the way that climate change is impacting our own communities, we're still not being highlighted. Because I knew that people were going to be like, well, you need to reach out to these people, da da da. And we ended up, following through with the guidelines that people put forward. And, to be honest, those guidelines shouldn't exist. I don't think that climate spaces should have to have a whole press part of their team to get people to pay attention. People should be paying attention to young people or people, period, doing work that is supposed to be protecting our communities now and for the future. But it also just shows you that even when, organizers, Black organizers are following through with that type of protocol, we're still not being listened to. So I ended up writing this long Twitter thread where I basically called out the climate community, and it got over 150,000 engagement, and I still got one inquiry. I got all these news and press people followed me, and not one of them reached out. I mean, one of them did, but that just shows you. So that's just been a very eye-opening thing for me, in which I feel like as a community, we've said this past year has been really incredible of like the, intersectionality and putting folks of color at the forefront. And yes, there has been a drastic shift. However, a drastic shift isn't enough, clearly. So there's still a lot that needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with you there. I just wanted to let our audience know that if you want to ask our panel any questions, I will be opening the last 10 to 15 minutes up. And so if you just write your questions in the Facebook comment, then we will try to get to as many of them as possible. Thank you. Neil, I was wondering if I could go back to you. You obviously have talked quite a bit about kind of international solidarity and collective solidarity, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about Bad Activist Collective, which obviously has organisers from around the globe, and how it works to kind of play both an individual role in the movement but then also a collective one.
Absolutely. So the Bad Activist Collective, like I mentioned, is a group of change makers and activists, and we have a vision for a more just and equitable planet for everyone who is a part of this planet. And so what that looks like is currently our Instagram, where we engage with all of the activists that follow us, and even through collaborations like the one that Wawa mentioned, Reclaiming Our Time, we're able to really connect these justice seekers, change makers, activists, artists, and really have them learn from each other, but also amplify each other's voices and work. The second arm of that collective is our website, which is badactivistcollective.com. And that is really the hub that holds everything together for these activists and change makers, because it has the Bad Book, which is our living blog. So individuals who are our contributors can come and share their thoughts, and we can then extrapolate that to our general audience. We also have availabilities for individuals to become contributors if they want to work with us. And we do pride ourselves on compensating activists, artists, change makers for their work. And so the third arm of that is the podcast, which is the Bad Activist Podcast. And that's kind of how this all started. This was the brainchild of three friends of mine, Tori, Julia, and Kishona. And they had the Bad Activist Podcast, which was a great medium for getting some of these topics that are lesser popular, lesser heard, lesser cared about, and really getting individuals to come to an understanding that these things are important as well. So once they were able to expand the collective, I was brought on board, and it's been an amazing journey. We also have someone named Amelia, and Amelia is a huge help in terms of our social media, which is, I think, the greatest medium that we're using to speak to our audience and to really grow those connections. So Bad Activists at its core is a space that wants to be a hub. You know, we make room for nuanced experiences, and we are not a monolith of thinkers. We have an atmosphere that's always ready to unlearn, always ready to take the light away from ourselves, so to speak, and help those who are not as equipped to have their messages amplified. And that's, I think, at its core, along with being pro-Black, pro-queer, anti-ableist, anti-capitalist, anti-patriarchy. These are the causes that we want to amplify. And you mentioned us being a global format. And that's absolutely true. I'm in the Bahamas, and Tori is in the UK, and Kishona is in the Netherlands, and Julia and Amelia are both in the United States. So there are some conflicts that come up with time zones, of course, and just personal availabilities due to daily life. But that, I think, serves to be like a case study for the importance of this work and how we're able to come together and use our individual capacities to impact positive change. So I think we use our working relationship and the complexities that come with that to kind of extrapolate our expectations for the platform. And through that essence, we're able to really work in a way that's intersectional and diverse and also accommodating to people's individual capacities.
Amazing, thanks so much. And I wanted to move to a more, I guess, philosophical question, which is, what do young people bring to the movement? I'll start with you, Nikki. Yeah.
I think young people brought a new perspective, because until 2019, environmental issues were only related to individual action and not as something collective, as Neil was saying. Like, the youth, in a way, redefine the fight for the climate crisis with a clear message that there is no social justice without climate justice, and that the change that is needed is a systemic change, and the only way to achieve it is with millions of people on the street, or millions of people demanding this change. And I also believe that the young people like bring passion. We are genuine because we don't have interest or people who pay us for what we do. We are simply people who care about the present and about our future. And finally, I think our generation grow up with feminism and racist fight, and that is in our identity. My first strike was when I was 8 years old, and I went to an International Women's Day, like the strike for the International Women's Day. And I think feminism is part of my identity, and I believe that the youth had a very important role to play in the fight for the climate crisis, not only because of greenhouse gases, but because it's a fight against all injustice, and environmentalism has to be intersectional, and the youth understand that, and I think that's very, very important.
Thanks, Nikki. And Mitzi, you were nodding along to a lot of that. So could I take the same question to you?
Well, Nikki said a lot of it. I think that the youth bring this energy. I used to not, like, people ask me this a lot, because like, oh, what's the role of the youth in climate justice? Exactly our title. And I used to never actually believe in what I would say. Like, I would ask, hey guys, what do we say? And we're like, oh, just say the energy and stuff. And I didn't know, like, I didn't 100% believe in it until I started working more with older NGOs. And I was like, why is no one volunteering to help with things? Like, so I asked another older NGO, I was like, why is no one else helping? They're like, we're tired. When we say that the youth have the energy, we're serious. And I'm like, wow, really? That's where we're at. And but it's true, like, we have that energy and that passion to keep pushing for more and for farther, because we don't expect, we're not compromising on our lives and on our future. We know that this is something that we deserve, something that we need to have. And so we push harder. And if you look at almost every historical movement, the youth have always been there alongside the marginalized sectors of society. We are always a revolutionary generation. And there will come a time when we're old and we'll have to pass the baton on. And that youth, that new generation of youth will be the ones more revolutionary than we are. And I think that's the beautiful thing with movements, that it always has a new generation that will liven things up again and to attack things and make sure that we don't compromise on anything, on justice, on peace, on freedom, on climate justice. And so true what Nikki said, that in each generation that gets more, we get more and more, like, we understand more and more how intersectional everything is. And that is only also because of all the movements that have happened before us. So we pay homage to that by continuing the fight and making sure that it gets even stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know youth climate movements are kind of championed for their diversity and their intersectionality. But kind of, as Wawa has said, there's still some kind of glaring problems within it. And so I wondered, well, if I could give you kind of like a double question, which is kind of the positive impact of youth in climate movements, but then also what more needs to be done to kind of address issues of well, a lack of diversity and a lack of kind of an equal seating at the table.
Yeah, I think everything that has been said before is so powerful. I think particularly the comments on the importance of intergenerational appreciation and the fact that every social movement that has come before us has been led by youth, and that energy is one that is passed on like a baton. And hopefully one day we'll be able to do that. I think what is particularly different, but also the same with this movement and other movements is the fact that, right, in general, every social movement that has come before us, folks have always been fighting for tomorrow, right? When we talk about the climate crisis in this movement, I think oftentimes, I think Mary Annalise Hegler had a piece where she talked about this, of the fact that we, as individuals, as folks being a part of movements, a lot of us have, tomorrow hasn't always been promised for all of us, right? So like this idea that the climate crisis and climate organizing is the first instance in which people haven't been promised a tomorrow, that's false. Within the context of the US and civil rights movement, people weren't sure about their tomorrow or the next week, right? People were fighting for their lives in that moment. And it's that energy that we're inheriting. At the same time, with the climate crisis, there has never been an issue this large and this encompassing that is something that is and will continue to influence all of us. So I think what is incredible about this moment is that young people are able to make the connections between so many different issues that have been siloed before in the past, to where we're saying, hey, if you care about prison abolition, there's a place for you in the climate movement. If you care about gender justice, economic justice, there is a crucial place for you in this movement, because this is an opportunity for us to dismantle all these systems of oppression in lieu of facilitating a just transition and a just climate future, because a just climate future can't, perpetuate any other system of oppression that continues now, because those same systems of oppression that exist now are the same ones that have led us to a climate crisis in the first place. And there's no opportunity, or there shouldn't be any opportunity for us in the future to have to go through this again. And what was the second part of the question that you asked?
Well, it was kind of about what young people bring to the movement. I guess you've kind of answered both of it, kind of what is needed to make things more equal and more intersectional, but then also the specific kind of energy that youth bring. But if you have
one last on that, sure. I think what's great right now, and something that we've talked about, is the fact that with so much information being accessible online, particularly in this moment where so many different facets of our lives have been transitioned online, there has been greater access. And I think that has always been an issue in all facets of life, that education has always been something, or access to equitable access to education has always been something that hasn't been super inclusive. However, I think there has to be work that's done, particularly as we hopefully begin to go back into in-person type of organizing spaces. I think that there probably needs to be some coaching or work done for folks that have entered in movements virtually, for how folks can continue to do this work in person, offline, because I think sometimes, sharing an Instagram infographic can be understood as being enough, when in reality, there is a lot of work to be done beyond, work being done online. And obviously work online is valid, but there are many more platforms to continue to do good work in our community. And I think there's a responsibility in our movement, as we've brought more people into the movement and participating virtually, for us also to have a guiding hand as folks begin to understand what it's like to do organizing and rallying in person, for those of us that I guess are veterans, to really help support folks in that transition if you choose to do so, because obviously organizing and activism looks different for all of us. However, there is a need for a holistic type of organizing across the board.
Thanks so much. And that actually leads me quite perfectly onto the first question that we've got from our audience, which is concerning kind of education within school. I mean, we're talking about accessible information and like ways of organizing. And I wondered if the panel had any advice for educators and formal public school systems as to how they can educate their students about climate justice and what they can do. I don't mind who starts or if anyone wants to take it.
Yeah. So I think that something that individuals, especially those who work in the realm of education, should consider when presenting issues such as the climate movement or environmental justice. I think it's important to use it as a teaching moment, but also to use it as an avenue to really test your creative capabilities in terms of communicating issues to individuals. Just because we have, I guess, this kind of approach to this problem that's simply academic, as opposed to incorporating elements of creativity that allow individuals who may not have all of the academic capabilities or may have mental disabilities to really digest the information that's being presented. And I think that creativity is important in terms of expressing ideas and passing on generational knowledge, because once you are able to tap into your creativity, then you are able to adapt. And once you adapt to whatever changes may come your way, or you can adapt to problems that are really impacting you immediately in your environment, once you tackle those through adaptation, then you can innovate. And that's what we need in the climate action movement. We need innovation. We need young people to not only be educated academically, but we need them to be put in positions where they're able to provide physical applications or manifestations of this work. So as much as what Wallace said about online activism is true, it is valid, it's absolutely valid, but we need to allow more mobilization and more creativity to allow young people, especially in communities of color, to get experience in the field and get their hands dirty, so to speak, because a lot of what we do is, like Wawa mentioned, overlooked. Even if we bring it academically, even if we do the campaigns, even if we get 150,000 shares, even if we get celebrities and politicians to really look at what we're doing, the message isn't being amplified. And so I think in terms of education, especially for communities that represent people like Wawa and myself, the creativity is what we're missing, because that will allow the innovation that we so desperately need.
I also think an important element in regards to environmental education is the fact that ethnic studies also goes hand in hand with that. So oftentimes I think within the case of the US, there have been multiple states that have actually banned ethnic studies, Chicana studies, like Arizona, I believe many southern states have done this. And I think oftentimes people don't understand that instances like that have huge implications, particularly when we talk about the environment, right? Because there has been this erasure of folks of color in the environmental space, especially from a historic lens, and really erasing that history, which erases any learning that happens on the behalf of young people on understanding how intricately our cultures are with the earth and the histories that our people have had with, I guess, the environmental sphere, you know, from farming and agriculture to even being advocates for public land. Things like that have been intentionally erased. And I think when we think about what we need to do in the future to properly and adequately educate our youth about the climate crisis in the present and then the past, present and in the future, we have to also integrate adequate learning about histories of children of color, indigenous children, and the things that have come before, because that helps create a more visible lineage of how intricately our ancestry is aligned with this stuff. I think oftentimes folks of color might ask themselves, I know that the climate crisis has something to do with me, but how does environmentalism have to do with me? When in reality, a lot of the organizing language that has been co-opted in the sustainability/environmental place has been taken from indigenous communities and communities of color from around the world. So there's a lot of reclaiming that has to be done. And I think educators have a really, really huge role to play in supporting youth and really understanding those things.
And it's important that we contextualize the education to what's happening in the country. Because, for example, here, well, there's still the fact that not a lot of people have access to education or quality education. Then when you do have climate education in school, it's very westernized and foreign and technical. As Nikki said, it's about melting ice caps and polar bears, but not about, which is part of the climate crisis and very important, but not about what's already happening here. Like, I grew up seeing typhoons and I grew up learning about carbon dioxide emissions, but not putting two and two together that they were the same thing. And that's why it's so important that the education we have is not only contextualized, but also empowering, so that it's not just numbers and statistics and the fact of science, but something that we can actually change and that we're actually doing something towards.
Oh yeah, Nikki, let's give you.
Yeah, something very short. I think a big barrier is also the language, because if you don't speak English, it's more difficult to understand what is a climate crisis, because all the things about climate crisis are written in English. So I think it's really also like a very big barrier, like to understand really what is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I have another question, which is likely going to have to be our last question, very sadly, but it's a hopeful one. And I want to ask the panel what their hopes are for the movement, especially in the lead up to COP26 this year. And Nikki, let's go with you.
Yeah, I think we are at a very important moment for the climate youth movement, because although we are still an emerging movement, a movement that is new, that boom is fading. And I think that now comes the most interesting thing, to see if, despite not being a novelty, not being something new, we can do things to change history. Like, we can really continue doing things that really can change the present and also the future. And I'm sure we can, and I think that's my hope for the movement leading up to the next COP.
Great, and Neil, let's go for you next.
Well, my hope for the movement in terms of the road toward COP26 is for us to really see the manifestation of all of this online activism and campaigning. I mean, I've been at it for, at this point, a full calendar year. And I've done it from this wall. I've done it from my home, my living room. And so what I'm most excited for is to see the on-the-ground mobilization. I mean, every company basically has championed the implementation of Black individuals, especially within their framework. And now that we're moving toward reopening society, I want to see that in real life. You know, in a few swipes, that post is gone. In a few hours, that's buried in the algorithm. So I want to see this algorithm exist in real life toward seeing individuals that look like me, that look like Mitzi, that look like Nikki and Wawa. I want to see us in real life now. I mean, I'm so happy to see you all on my screen, but I want to be there, and I want to see people that look like me existing in spaces, of course, within a safe way, and of course, giving restrictions. But I'm just very excited to see that exist in real life now, because I think it's very easy to do on the internet in comparison, because like I said, it takes into factor things like safety, like availability, like capacity. But for those of us that are able to, within a safe way, I'd like to see us really take this movement to the streets.
Thanks so much. And Mitzi, what about you? What's your hope for the movement?
I mean, Neil put it really well, and so did Nikki. I feel like my hope for the movement is that we get some wins this year. We get some things that we can actually celebrate, like big things. We've had like a lot of things to celebrate nationally, and in each of our countries, we've been doing amazing things. But we need a global victory at this point, not just for, you know, the urgency of the climate crisis, but also to push people forward. Nikki and I are actually involved in one of these campaigns. It's called the Clean Up Standard Chartered campaign, and it's something that we're eyeing to be a very tangible win for the global movement, where we're asking Standard Chartered Bank, a UK-based bank that mostly funds coal in MAPA countries, so Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and their market is also mostly in Asia and Africa, to stop funding coal. And so far, they've been responsive. They've already changed their coal policy a little bit from a few weeks of our actions, and so we're really pushing forward to get these things for the movement, and also that we keep growing and learning. You know, we have to be honest that Fridays for Future is a very Eurocentric and white movement, especially when it was starting out. And just as Neil was saying, that we are seeing more and more people like us in the front lines, and that's how it should be, because we are also the ones at the front lines of the climate crisis. We're the ones being impacted the most. And so it's good for us to keep growing as a movement, to keep learning from each other, and to keep normalizing the culture of criticism, but constructive, so that we grow as people and as activists and as a movement. Like, I have had way too many conversations with white people saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll make sure that I never do this again, or that I'll make sure that I feel so bad that I had to do this, and that and sure, great, but like, you have to accept that you're always going to make a mistake, because you will never understand what it is to not be white. You will never understand what it means to be a person of color, to be a marginalized person. So you will always have that insensitivity. And the important thing is that you're willing and open to learn. Like, you shouldn't feel bad that you're being called. I mean, feel bad that you did wrong things, but don't. They have made that the center of the conversation, where they're like, oh my God, I feel so bad, Missy. I'm so sorry I did that. I feel horrible. I'm like, okay, great. Do something about it. Like, suck it up. You know, it's like, that's what I want to see. That's the energy I want to see coming this year, that more and more people realize that we always need to learn more, and we need to listen to each other, and we need to be ready to be called out and to listen. And even if it hurts, of course it hurts, of course it sucks, then suck it up, figure it out. We can do this. This is what we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Less white guilt and more passing the mic, for sure. And Wawa, if you have anything to add, I know there have been some amazing comments, but if you want to bring us home on kind of the hope that you have in the movement. Oh, and just one last thing, Mitzi and Nikki, we have also shared your campaign in our newsletter tomorrow, so all our international community can help out with the Standard Chartered appeal as well. But yes, Wawa, can you end us with a little bit of hope for the movement?
Yeah, I think we're, as a movement, we're getting very, very intentional with our organizing spaces. I always think back, I had to read this book called Rehearsing Revolution back, I'm sorry, someone's knocking on my door, but 1 second, let me just.
That is totally fine. Yeah, I would completely agree with where I was going with the intentional organizing has become, it's gained a lot of clarity as well. No, go for it.
So random. Oh yes, so I had to read this book sophomore year in high school called Rehearsing Revolution, and essentially it was talking about how labor unions in the United States in between the world wars, there's a reason why I'm saying this, in between the world wars, they started basically financing and creating universities, and they were doing so that they could both provide adult education at free or low cost for a lot of the jobless folks that were not in work after not being employed by the war, but also because there's a reason why I'm saying this, sorry, my brain is all over the place, but also so that they could essentially radicalize them in being a part of their labor unions. And the way that they were able to do this was through drama. So they were essentially putting a lot of their funds towards performance arts and having a lot of these plays basically act out revolution so that they could move the acting to real life and really show people the power of organizing, activism, and rallying. And I've always used that lens of rehearsing revolution as something that we have to orient ourselves in our organizing spaces. When we're working towards a just climate future, we need to make sure that our organizing spaces are replicating the dynamics that we want to see in our future world. So we have organizations like Fridays for Future that are now, hopefully, I think so from the conversations that we're having here, prioritizing MAPA activists. When we have organizations like Black Girl Environmentalists, Bad Activists Collective, Pass the Mic Climate, Generation Green, really taking up space in this movement and really ensuring that frontline folks are at the front line of the conversation, that shows that we're really beginning to replicate the dynamics that we want in a just future. And I think that is really, really beautiful, and it really excites me.
Thank you so much. That's the perfect note to end it on, I think. Thank you to my wonderful panel and to everyone who showed up today. As I said at the beginning, this is recorded and it will be accessible via our Facebook for eternity. So if anyone couldn't catch it, then you'll be able to at a later point. But yeah, for now, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone and my wonderful panelists. And I hope you all I hope Mitzi can get to bed now because it's 3 a.m. And yeah, to the rest of you, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.